The glass tower of Meridian Holdings rose into the grey morning sky, like a monument to ambition itself, its reflective surfaces catching the first pale light of dawn and scattering it across the awakening city below. Within its steel and crystal confines, on the 47th floor, there existed a world unto itself, a realm of polished mahogany, of leather that whispered wealth with every creak, of air so carefully regulated that one might forget the very existence of weather beyond those tinted windows. It was here, in the sprawling conference room that commanded a view of the harbour, that 9 of the city's most distinguished legal minds had gathered, their collective brilliance purchased at rates that would make a common labourer weep. They had been assembled at great expense, these lawyers, each one a specialist in their particular domain of corporate law. There was Henderson, whose silver tongue had won settlements that made headlines. There was Patricia Volkov, whose understanding of international trade law was considered without peer. There was James Chen, who could find loopholes in legislation the way a truffle pig finds its quarry. The others were no less impressive in their credentials, their reputations, their hourly fees. They sat around that great oval table, their laptops open before them like modern grimoires, their coffee growing cold in porcelain cups that bore the company's discreet logo, and they faced a problem that had, for 3 days now, proven itself their master. The problem itself seemed, on its surface, almost laughably simple. A contract, merely one contract among the thousands that flowed through Meridian Holdings each quarter, had become entangled in a web of contradictory clauses, competing jurisdictions, and what appeared to be either a spectacular oversight or a deliberate act of sabotage. The document in question governed a merger worth $300 million, a union of 2 pharmaceutical companies that would reshape the generic drug market across 3 continents. It should have been straightforward. It should have been, in the parlance of these legal experts, a matter of routine due diligence and standard compliance verification. But somewhere in the document's 243 pages, amid the whereases and the parties of the first part, amid the subordinate clauses and the amendments to amendments, there existed a paradox. Clause 17, subsection 4, paragraph 2, directly contradicted Clause 63, subsection 1, paragraph 5. This alone would have been manageable. Contracts often contained contradictions that could be resolved through established hierarchies of precedence, but these 2 clauses, through a chain of references and dependencies that spanned the entire document, each claimed primacy over the other. It was a logical loop, a snake eating its own tail, and it rendered the entire contract legally unenforceable. 3 days. 3 days these 9 brilliant minds had wrestled with the problem, approaching it from every angle their expensive educations and years of experience had taught them. They had tried rewriting the clauses. They had tried inserting mediating language. They had tried appealing to external regulatory frameworks. Each solution, when examined with the rigor that such a high-stakes matter demanded, created new problems or fell apart under scrutiny. The merger, scheduled to close in 6 days, hung in the balance. The companies involved had invested millions in preparation. Stock prices had already begun to reflect the anticipated union. Backing out now would trigger penalty clauses that would bankrupt one company and severely damage the other. And so they sat, these 9 lawyers, as the morning sun climbed higher and painted the conference room in shades of gold that seemed to mock their predicament. They spoke in the careful, measured tones of people who are very well paid to have answers and who find themselves, against all expectation, without them. If we could establish temporal precedents, Henderson was saying, his voice carrying that courtroom resonance that had served him so well over the years, argue that Clause 17 was drafted first and therefore takes priority. The document's revision history shows they were drafted simultaneously, interrupted Patricia Volkov, her accent still carrying traces of her Moscow childhood despite decades in America. I've been through the metadata 3 times. Same timestamp, same author, same editing session. There's no temporal hierarchy to exploit. James Chen leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him in an attitude of contemplation. What if we approach it as a matter of interpretation rather than precedence? Argue that the apparent contradiction is actually a complementary relationship when viewed through the lens of any court would see through that in seconds, said Margaret Klein, the firm's senior partner, her tone not unkind but absolutely firm. We'd be laughed out of mediation. The contradiction is explicit, not implicit. These clauses aren't open to creative interpretation. The discussion continued in this vein, each lawyer offering some new approach only to have it gently, professionally dismantled by their colleagues. There was no animosity in these exchanges. These were people who had worked together for years, who respected one another's abilities, who understood that they faced not incompetence, but genuinely formidable complexity. Yet, beneath the professional courtesy, one could sense a growing unease, a creeping awareness that they might impossibly fail. In the corner of the room, barely noticed by these titans of jurisprudence, moved a figure so thoroughly beneath their sphere of consciousness that she might as well have been invisible. Rosa Martinez was 43 years old, though worry and work had etched lines in her face that might have suggested a harder decade or two. She wore the navy blue uniform of Spotless Solutions, the commercial cleaning company that held the contract for Meridian Holdings offices. Her cart, laden with supplies and tools, made only the softest whisper as she moved about the conference room's periphery, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces, ensuring that the environment remained pristine for these important deliberations. Rosa had been cleaning offices for 21 years, ever since she had arrived in this country with nothing but hope and determination, and a daughter who needed a better life than the one they had left behind. She had cleaned restaurants and medical offices and apartment buildings. She had scrubbed floors and scoured toilets and made beds in budget hotels where the managers watched the cleaning staff with perpetual suspicion. She had worked her way up, in the modest way that one can work up in such a profession, to the more prestigious commercial contracts, the tall buildings downtown where the work was steadier and the pay slightly better, and where, crucially, the management treated you like a human being rather than an inconvenient necessity. She had been assigned to the 47th floor for 3 years now. She knew every office, every conference room, every supply closet. She knew which executives liked their blinds open and which preferred them closed. She knew who ate lunch at their desk and who left for the nearby bistro. She knew whose family photos sat on their credenza and whose offices were decorated with awards and diplomas. She knew these things not from nosiness, but from simple observation, from the accumulated knowledge that comes from being present in a space regularly, while being so thoroughly overlooked that people behave as though they are alone. She knew, for instance, that these 9 lawyers had been meeting in this room for 3 days. She had emptied their trash bins, which overflowed with printed drafts covered in annotations and crumpled papers that represented failed attempts at solutions. She had refilled their water pitchers and replaced their coffee supplies. She had observed them through the room's glass walls as she worked in the corridor outside, noting the progression from confident determination on day 1 to focused concern on day 2 to the barely contained frustration that characterized this 3rd morning. Rosa understood, in the way that people who work with their hands often understand, that intelligence comes in many forms. She held no illusions about her own formal education, which had ended when she was 14, and family circumstances had required her to work rather than study. She could not pass a legal clause or cite precedent. She could not calculate compound interest in her head or explain the principles of corporate governance. But she had learned, over her 43 years, that some problems that seem impossibly complex to those who overthink them become surprisingly simple when approached with fresh eyes and common sense. She was not, it must be said, deliberately eavesdropping on these lawyers' conversation. The conference room was large, her work took her throughout its space, and the lawyers spoke freely, having long since ceased to register her presence. It was impossible not to hear them. And having heard them, impossible for her mind not to work on what she heard. Rosa had always been this way. Her daughter Maria would laugh and call her Mama the puzzle solver, forever seeing patterns and connections that others missed. It was a trait that had served her well in her work. She could look at a stained carpet and know not just what had caused the stain, but the most efficient way to remove it. She could organize a supply closet with a logic that made every subsequent task easier. She could spot a maintenance issue before it became a crisis. As she worked, wiping down the windowsills with long, practiced strokes, she found herself thinking about the problem these lawyers faced. She had, over 3 days of cleaning around them, absorbed the basics of their dilemma. 2 parts of their document disagreed with each other in a way that couldn't be fixed. Each part said it was more important than the other. Every time they tried to fix it, they made it worse. Rosa moved to the far end of the room, where the morning light was strongest, and began dusting the built-in shelves that held various business books and corporate awards. Her mind turned the problem over, examining it from angles that had nothing to do with law or precedent. She thought about it the way she might think about a stubborn stain or a door that wouldn't quite close properly. Not as a matter of theory, but as a practical challenge to be solved. The lawyers' voices rose and fell behind her, their discussion growing more technical, more esoteric. They were talking about something called severability clauses now, and whether they could invoke some principle that would allow them to simply delete the problematic sections. But this, it seemed, would gut the contract of essential protections and safeguards. The companies would never accept it. Rosa finished the shelves and moved to straighten the chairs along the conference room's sides, the seats where junior associates and assistants would sit during larger meetings. As she adjusted each chair to its proper position, ensuring they were equidistant and properly aligned, a thought occurred to her. It was such a simple thought, so obvious in its way that she almost dismissed it. Surely these brilliant lawyers, with all their education and experience, would have considered it already. Surely she, who had never set foot in a law school or read a legal textbook, could not see something that 9 specialists had missed. But the thought persisted, growing stronger as she examined it from various angles in her mind. It was not a legal solution exactly, or rather, it was a legal solution, but it came at the problem from a direction that seemed too straightforward, too uncomplicated to have been overlooked. Rosa had been cleaning corporate offices long enough to know the unwritten rules that governed interactions between people like her and people like the lawyers in this room. She knew that cleaners were expected to be functionally invisible, to move through spaces without drawing attention, to avoid inserting themselves into matters that were above their station. She had learned this not from any formal instruction, but from countless small moments over the years. The way people's eyes would slide over her as though she were part of the furniture, the way conversations would continue as though she were not present, the way her attempts at friendly greeting were sometimes met with startled surprise, as if a statue had suddenly spoken. But Rosa had also learned, through her years in this country and in this profession, that there were moments when silence was complicity, when failing to speak was its own form of wrong. She thought of her daughter Maria, now 21, and in her 3rd year at the State University studying computer science. Maria, who existed because Rosa had found the courage to leave a bad situation, to cross borders, to endure hardship in service of a better future. Maria, who had been raised on stories of speaking up when it mattered, of not allowing fear or social convention to silence truth. Rosa finished arranging the chairs and collected her supplies, preparing to move to the next office on her morning rounds. She wheeled her cart toward the conference room door, ready to slip out as quietly as she had entered, but at the threshold she paused. She looked back at the 9 lawyers, at their expensive suits and their tired faces, at the papers scattered across the table before them, at the laptops displaying columns of text that might as well have been hieroglyphics for all she could pass them. She thought about the $300 million at stake. She thought about the jobs and livelihoods that depended on this merger going through. She thought about how something that seemed so impossibly complex might just possibly have a solution that everyone was simply looking at from the wrong angle. Rosa set her hand on the cart handle and stood there wavering. The moment stretched. From somewhere down the corridor came the distant ding of an elevator arriving, the muffled sound of voices as other early arrivals emerged onto the floor. In the conference room, Henderson was speaking again, outlining yet another approach that, from the reactions of his colleagues, seemed no more promising than its predecessors. And then Rosa made her decision. She turned her cart around, wheeled it back into the conference room, and cleared her throat, softly at first, then a bit more loudly when the lawyers didn't immediately notice. The effect was remarkable. 9 heads turned in unison. 9 pairs of eyes focused on her with expressions ranging from mild surprise to outright confusion. It was, Rosa thought, probably the first time in 3 days that all 9 of these brilliant people had been in complete agreement about anything. They were united in their bewilderment that the cleaning lady was attempting to address them. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Rosa said, her accented English carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her voice remained steady. Years of speaking up for herself in situations where she had no power had taught her how to project calm even when feeling anything but. "I couldn't help overhearing your problem. About the contract with the 2 parts that disagree." Margaret Klein recovered first, her expression shifting from surprise to a kind of polite confusion. Yes, we're working on a rather complex legal matter." Her tone suggested gentle dismissal, a signal that Rosa should return to her work and leave such matters to those qualified to handle them. But Rosa had committed now, had crossed that invisible line that separated her world from theirs. There was no retreating without speaking her piece. "I think I might know how to fix it," she said simply. The silence that followed this statement was profound. It was the silence of people encountering something so far outside their expectations that they lack an immediate framework for response. James Chen glanced at Patricia Volkov. Henderson looked at Margaret Klein, his eyebrows raised in a silent question. One of the other lawyers, Rosa didn't know his name, actually chuckled, then caught himself, looking embarrassed. Margaret Klein, to her credit, did not laugh. She regarded Rosa with an expression that mixed patronizing kindness with barely concealed impatience. "That's very kind of you to want to help," she said, her tone the one adults use with children who have offered to assist with complex tasks they cannot possibly understand. "But this is a rather technical legal issue. It requires specialized knowledge of contract law, corporate governance, international trade regulations." "I understand," Rosa interrupted gently. She had not come this far to be easily dismissed. "I know I don't have your education, but sometimes, when you're very close to a problem, you can't see simple answers." She paused, gathering her courage. "May I show you what I mean?" "It will take maybe 2 minutes." The lawyers exchanged glances. Rosa could read the silent communication flowing between them. "This is absurd. We don't have time for this. But also, what harm can 2 minutes do? And perhaps beneath that, we've been stuck for 3 days. What do we have to lose?" It was Henderson who spoke next, his voice carrying a note of amusement that wasn't quite mockery but wasn't far from it. "All right, please enlighten us. How would you solve our impossible contract paradox?" Rosa felt the weight of their skepticism, the collective doubt of 9 people who had spent years and hundreds of thousands of dollars becoming experts in their field, now being asked to listen to someone whose formal education had ended at age 14. For a moment, she almost lost her nerve. Who was she to presume? What arrogance made her think she could see what they had missed? But then she thought of Maria again, thought of all the times she had told her daughter to trust her instincts, to speak her truth, to not let anyone make her feel small. She thought of the countless times in her own life when she had solved problems that others had overcomplicated, when her practical approach had cut through tangles that seemed impossible. "May I?" Rosa asked, gesturing toward the table where papers lay scattered. Margaret Klein, with visible reluctance, nodded. Rosa approached the table, her cleaning cart temporarily abandoned by the door. She looked at the documents spread before her, page after page of dense text, sections highlighted and annotated, sticky notes bearing cryptic abbreviations and reference numbers. She couldn't read it, not really. The language was too technical, the sentences too convoluted. But she didn't need to read it to understand the fundamental problem. You have two rules that fight each other, she said, pointing vaguely at the papers. This one says it's the boss, and this one says it's the boss. Yes? That's an oversimplification, but essentially correct, James Chen said. And you can't delete them because they're both important? They contain crucial provisions regarding intellectual property transfer and liability limitations, Patricia Volkov explained, her tone suggesting she was humoring a child. Without them, the contract is unenforceable. Rosa nodded slowly. So you can't delete them, and you can't change them because they need to say exactly what they say. And you can't pick which one wins because they both say they win. She paused, letting the summary sit in the air. Is that right? Again, oversimplified, but yes, Margaret Klein said. That's our dilemma. Okay, Rosa said. She took a breath. So don't pick between them. Make a new rule that's bigger than both. Put it at the very beginning of the contract. Make it say that if any two rules fight each other, you solve it by... She paused, searching for the right words. By asking someone outside to decide. A judge or someone neutral. And make this new rule say that it's the biggest boss of all the rules, even the ones that say they're the boss. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one hummed with something Rosa couldn't quite identify. The lawyers stared at her, then at each other, then back at the papers on the table. Henderson opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. A hierarchical override clause, he said slowly. A meta-provision that establishes a conflict resolution mechanism and explicitly places itself above all other provisions, including those that claim primacy. We'd need to carefully word it to ensure courts would honor the hierarchy, James Chen said. But his voice had changed, had taken on an edge of excitement. But if we position it properly in the contract architecture, cite the appropriate precedents for metatextual priority. The Restatement Second of Contracts, Section 203, Patricia Volkov said, speaking rapidly now. It specifically addresses the interpretation of contracts containing conflicting terms. If we craft a provision that leverages that framework, we're not changing the conflicting clauses themselves, Margaret Klein said, and Rosa could hear her mind working, could almost see the gears turning. We're creating a superior provision that manages the conflict without requiring us to resolve it directly. It's not a solution so much as a structured procedure for reaching a solution. Both companies would accept it, Henderson added, already reaching for his laptop. It doesn't favor either party. It simply establishes a fair mechanism for resolution if the conflict becomes relevant to implementation. The lawyers were no longer looking at Rosa. They had turned to their computers, to their papers, their fingers flying across keyboards, their voices overlapping as they began to hammer out the precise language of this new provision. Rosa watched them for a moment, a small smile touching her lips, and then she quietly returned to her cart. She was wheeling it toward the door when Margaret Klein's voice stopped her. Wait. The lawyer stood, her expression transformed from patronizing kindness to something approaching wonder. What's your name? Rosa Martinez, ma'am. Rosa. Margaret Klein walked around the table, approaching her. I don't know how you saw that. We've been drowning in complexity for 3 days and you just... She shook her head. You gave us the answer in 2 minutes. Rosa felt her cheeks warm. I just listened to what you said. Sometimes problems sound more complicated than they are. How long have you been cleaning this building? Henderson asked, and there was no amusement in his voice now, only genuine curiosity. 3 years on this floor, ma'am. 21 years in America doing this work. Remarkable, Patricia Volkov murmured. Absolutely remarkable. Rosa felt uncomfortable under their sudden attention, under the weight of their reassessment of her. She was not accustomed to being looked at directly, to being seen as a person with thoughts worth considering. "I should finish my work," she said. "I have many offices to clean still." "Of course," Margaret Klein said, but as Rosa began to push her cart toward the door again, the lawyer added, "Rosa, thank you, truly. You've saved this deal. You've saved both companies, actually. I'm not sure you understand the magnitude of what you just did." Rosa paused at the threshold, one hand on her cart. "I just hope I helped," she said simply, and then she left the conference room, slipping back into the role of near invisibility that had been hers for so long. But as she moved down the corridor, pushing her cart with its cleaning supplies and its trash bags, Rosa felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It was pride, certainly, but something more than that. It was the feeling of having been seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. It was the feeling of having her intelligence recognized, her perspective valued. It was small and fragile, this feeling, easily crushed by a return to indifference or dismissal. But for now, in this moment, it was there. She continued with her morning rounds, moving from office to office with practiced efficiency. She dusted and vacuumed and emptied trash bins. She wiped down desks and refilled supplies and ensured that every space was pristine for the executives who would arrive over the next hour. It was the same work she did every day, work that required no formal education but demanded attention to detail, physical endurance, and a kind of invisible care that most people never noticed or appreciated. Around her, Meridian Holdings came to life. Executives arrived, their footsteps purposeful on the polished floors. Assistants hurried past with coffee and folders, conference rooms filled with people discussing quarterly reports and market strategies and client relations. The great machine of commerce hummed and whirred, and Rosa moved through it like a ghost, essential but unseen, necessary but unacknowledged. She was cleaning an empty office on the far side of the floor, running her vacuum over the carpet, when her supervisor appeared in the doorway. Carlos Mendez was a heavy-set man in his 50s, Puerto Rican by birth, who had worked his way up to floor supervisor after 20 years with spotless solutions. He was a fair boss, neither cruel nor particularly kind, simply professional and efficient. "Rosa," he called over the sound of the vacuum. She shut it off and turned to face him. "I need you in conference room B when you finish here. They're asking for you specifically." Rosa felt a flutter of something in her stomach. Anxiety, anticipation. Did I do something wrong? Carlos's expression was puzzled. Wrong? No. Some executive called down, said they need to see you. The CEO's office, I think. I don't know what it's about, but when the CEO's office asks, we don't keep them waiting. The CEO. Rosa felt her mouth go dry. Alexander Blackwood, founder and chief executive of Meridian Holdings, was a figure of almost mythical status in the building. His face appeared in the financial papers, on magazine covers. He was 48 years old and had built his company from a small investment firm into a financial powerhouse worth billions. Rosa had seen him perhaps 3 times in 3 years, always at a distance, always surrounded by assistants and advisors. He moved through the building like a force of nature, and the very air seemed to change when he was present. "Now?" she asked. "Soon as you can," Carlos confirmed. "I'll finish your section if needed." Rosa nodded, her mind racing. Had the lawyers told him about her suggestion? Surely not. Surely that would be beneath his notice, a minor legal matter resolved by his attorneys. Perhaps this was about something else entirely. Perhaps, and her anxiety spiked. She had violated some protocol, had overstepped some boundary that she didn't know existed. She made her way to conference room B, her cart left behind in the office where she'd been working. She smoothed her uniform, acutely aware of how rumpled it must look after hours of work. She could feel sweat at her temples, on her palms. When she reached the conference room, the door was closed. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, then knocked firmly 3 times. "Come in," called a voice, deep, male, cultured. Rosa opened the door and stepped inside. The conference room was smaller than the one where she'd encountered the lawyers, but no less elegantly appointed. Sitting at the head of the table was Alexander Blackwood himself. He was tall, with silver threading through dark hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Rosa made in 6 months. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, the eyes of someone who missed nothing. Standing beside him was Margaret Klein, and arranged around the table were several of the other lawyers from that morning, along with 2 people Rosa didn't recognize. A man and a woman, both in expensive business attire, both watching her with expressions of curious interest. "Ms. Martinez," Alexander Blackwood said, rising from his chair. To Rosa's astonishment, he extended his hand to her. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." Rosa stood frozen, staring at his extended hand. In 21 years of cleaning offices, no executive had ever stood for her, much less offered to shake her hand. She was aware of everyone watching her, aware of her cleaning uniform, aware of the vast gulf that separated her world from theirs. "Please," Blackwood repeated, his hand still extended. "I promise I don't bite." Hesitantly, Rosa took his hand. His grip was firm, warm. He gestured to a chair, and she sat, perching on its edge, ready to flee at any moment. "I'll get straight to the point," Blackwood said, resuming his own seat. "Margaret here just told me what happened this morning, how you solved a problem that had 9 of the best lawyers in the city stumped for 3 days. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I want to hear it from you. Walk me through how you arrived at your solution." Rosa's mouth felt dry. She glanced at Margaret Klein, who gave her an encouraging nod. I just listened to what they were saying, about the 2 parts of the contract that fought each other." "Go on," Blackwood encouraged. "Well, they couldn't change the parts, and they couldn't delete them, and they couldn't pick between them. So I thought, maybe you don't solve the fight. Maybe you just make a rule for how to solve it later when it matters. Put someone neutral in charge of deciding." Blackwood was quiet for a moment, his fingers steepled before him. Simple, direct, elegant. He looked at Margaret Klein. "How long did it take your team to draft the actual provision once Ms. Martinez gave you the concept?" 90 minutes, Margaret admitted. "We've already sent it to both companies. Their legal teams are reviewing it now, but preliminary feedback is extremely positive. This deal is going to close on schedule." $300 million, Blackwood said, his eyes still on Rosa. "That's what this merger is worth. Because of your 2 minutes of common sense, that deal happens. Jobs are preserved, research continues, generic medications reach markets that desperately need them." He paused. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Rosa shook her head slightly. "I was just trying to help." "Yes," Blackwood said softly. "You were just trying to help." He glanced at the 2 people Rosa didn't recognize. "Ms. Martinez, these are Daniel Park and Jennifer Huang, respectively our Chief Operations Officer and Director of Human Resources. I've asked them to join us because I have a question for you, and I want them to hear your answer." Rosa's anxiety intensified. "Yes, sir? How would you like a different job?" The question hung in the air. Rosa stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Sir? A different job," Blackwood repeated. "Here at Meridian Holdings, not cleaning. Though there's absolutely no shame in that work, and we're grateful for the excellent job you do. But something that makes use of the mind you just demonstrated." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not talking about making you a lawyer or putting you in a position you're not qualified for, but there are roles in this company, analytical roles, problem-solving roles, that don't necessarily require fancy degrees. What they require is the ability to see through complexity to simple solutions. That's a rare skill, Ms. Martinez. Rarer than you might think." Rosa felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I don't have the education." "You have a high school education?" Jennifer Huang asked gently. "I studied until I was 14, Rosa admitted. "In El Salvador. Then I had to work." "But you're fluent in English and Spanish?" Jennifer continued. "Yes, ma'am. And you've been successfully navigating corporate environments for 2 decades, Daniel Park added. "That takes intelligence, observation skills, adaptability. Those are valuable assets." Blackwood leaned forward again. "I'm thinking something in our operations analysis division. We have a team that examines our internal processes, looks for inefficiencies, suggests improvements. It's about pattern recognition and common sense, more than technical expertise. We'd train you, of course, start you at an entry level, but a real entry level, not a token position. He named a salary that made Rosa's head spin, nearly 3 times what she currently made. "I need to think," Rosa said, her voice barely a whisper. It's too much, too sudden." "Of course," Blackwood said. "Take the time you need. But Ms. Martinez, Rosa, I want you to understand something." His voice took on a different quality, became more personal somehow. "I built this company from nothing. I started with $300 and an idea. People told me I couldn't do it. I was too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. They were experts, and they all knew better than me, but I had something they didn't. I could see opportunities they missed. I could solve problems they overcomplicated." He paused. "This morning, you did the same thing. You saw what 9 experts missed. That's not luck. That's talent. And I don't waste talent." Rosa felt tears threatening and fought them back. May I have until tomorrow to decide?" "Take a week if you need it," Blackwood said. "Jennifer will give you her direct contact information. When you're ready, call her." He stood again, offered his hand again. "Whatever you decide, thank you. Genuinely. You did this company a great service today." Rosa shook his hand, nodded to the others, and somehow found her way out of the conference room. She walked back through the corridors of the 47th floor, past the offices she cleaned every day, past the executives who never saw her. She found Carlos and told him she needed to go home early, felt sick. He took one look at her face and agreed without question. She rode the elevator down to the ground floor, walked out into the grey morning that had turned into an overcast afternoon. She stood on the sidewalk outside Meridian Holdings, looking up at its glass tower that seemed to stretch endlessly into the clouded sky. And then finally, she let herself cry, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming confusion of emotions she couldn't begin to name. Hope and fear and disbelief, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding that her life, which had seemed so fixed and determined, might actually contain possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Rosa did not go directly home. She could not. The apartment she shared with Maria in the Sunset District, modest, clean, filled with second-hand furniture that Rosa had painstakingly restored, seemed too small to contain the enormity of what had just occurred. Instead, she found herself walking, her feet carrying her through streets she knew well, past shops whose owners greeted her by name, past the community center where she had once taken evening English classes, past the church where she sometimes attended Sunday Mass, though her faith had become complicated over the years. The fog was rolling in from the ocean, that characteristic San Francisco phenomenon that turned the city into something mysterious and otherworldly. Rosa walked through it, her uniform jacket pulled tight against the chill, her mind replaying the morning's events again and again. She kept expecting to discover that she had misunderstood, that the offer had been something different from what she thought, that there would be some catch that would make it impossible or inappropriate or simply too good to be true. She had lived too long with disappointment to trust easy fortune. When she had first come to America, she had believed in the mythology of it, the land of opportunity, where hard work was rewarded, where anyone could rise. And it was true, in a way. She had survived. She had made a life. She had given Maria opportunities that would never have existed in El Salvador. But she had also learned the limits of that mythology, had understood that there were invisible barriers that hemmed people like her into certain spaces, certain roles, certain expectations. Cleaning was honest work, and Rosa had never been ashamed of it. But neither had she been blind to how it positioned her in the social hierarchy, how it rendered her functionally invisible to most of the people whose offices she cleaned. She had accepted this, had made peace with it, because acceptance was easier than constant rage against circumstances largely beyond her control. She had poured her ambitions into Maria instead, had worked double shifts to pay for SAT prep courses, had researched scholarships and financial aid with a determination that would have impressed any military strategist. And now, impossibly, Alexander Blackwood was offering her something different, not just a better job, though it was certainly that, but recognition, validation, the acknowledgement that she possessed intelligence worth leveraging, perspective worth valuing. It terrified her. Rosa found herself at Ocean Beach, staring out at the grey water that met grey sky in an indistinct horizon. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp in the damp air. A few hardy souls walked along the sand despite the cold, their figures indistinct in the thickening fog. Rosa sat on a bench near the sea wall and tried to organize her thoughts into some coherent structure. What did she know about operations analysis? Nothing. What business did she have accepting a position in a field completely foreign to her? What if she failed? What if this was some elaborate setup, some test she was meant to fail so that they could confirm their pre-existing assumptions about people like her? But then, what did she truly have to lose? Her current job would still exist if she declined. Spotless Solutions would continue employing her. Her life would proceed as it had for 3 years, for 21 years, with its familiar struggles and modest satisfactions. The offer, if it was genuine, represented risk, certainly, but also possibility. She thought about Maria, who would be finishing her afternoon classes about now, probably heading to her part-time job at the campus bookstore. Maria, who had grown up watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, who had learned independence perhaps too early, who had never quite lost a certain wariness about expecting too much from the world. What would Maria say about this offer? Rosa pulled out her phone, a model several years old but still functional, and composed a text message. "Mija, something happened today at work, something big. Can we talk tonight? I'm okay, nothing bad. Just need to discuss." She hesitated before adding, "I love you," then sent the message. The reply came almost immediately. "Mom, you're scaring me. You sure you're okay? I can leave work early if you need." Rosa smiled despite herself. Maria, ever the protector, though it should have been the other way around. "I promise I'm fine. Better than fine, maybe. Just want to tell you in person. See you at home around 6? Okay, but you better not be keeping me in suspense on purpose for drama. That would be mean, LOL. Love you too." With Maria's response settling some of her agitation, Rosa stood and began the long walk home. The fog had grown thicker, muffling sounds, turning the city into a series of disconnected vignettes. She walked through them slowly, giving herself time to think, to feel, to gradually accept that what had happened was real. By the time she reached her apartment building, a 3-story structure painted a faded yellow with external stairs and narrow balconies, she had not reached any conclusions, but had at least achieved a kind of calm. She climbed to the 2nd floor, unlocked the door, and entered the space that had been her refuge for 5 years. The apartment was small, a living room that flowed into a kitchen alcove, one bedroom that Rosa had given to Maria while she herself slept on a pull-out couch, a bathroom whose fixtures she had learned to repair herself through necessity and YouTube tutorials. But it was clean, orderly, made comfortable through small touches that cost little but meant much. Plants on the windowsills, carefully tended, photographs on the walls, Maria at various ages, Rosa's mother before she passed, a few friends. Books on makeshift shelves, a mix of Maria's textbooks and Rosa's own eclectic reading, checked out from the library in batches. Rosa changed out of her uniform, showered away the day's work, and dressed in comfortable clothes. She made herself tea, a habit acquired from the Irish family she had worked for years ago, and sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, and simply breathed. She must have dozed because the sound of Maria's key in the lock startled her awake. She looked at the clock, nearly 6 as promised. The door opened and Maria entered, her backpack heavy with textbooks, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Maria was beautiful in a way that still sometimes caught Rosa by surprise, though she had watched her daughter grow from infancy to adulthood. She had Rosa's dark hair and warm brown skin, but her features carried traces of a father Rosa preferred not to think about. A man who had been charming and promising until he wasn't, who had left when Maria was 2, who existed now only as a legally mandated but rarely paid child support obligation. Maria wore jeans and an oversized sweatshirt bearing her university's logo, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired, Rosa noted. The semester was demanding, and Maria's combination of full course load, part-time work, and participation in the Latino Student Association left her perpetually stretched thin. "Okay, I'm here," Maria said, dropping her backpack by the door with a heavy thud. "Spill, what's the big news that couldn't be texted?" Rosa gestured to the other chair at the small table. "Sit down, Mija. I'll make you tea." "Mom, I'm dying of curiosity. Tea can wait." "Sit," Rosa repeated more firmly this time, and Maria complied, though her expression suggested this was only temporary indulgence of maternal authority. Rosa poured a second cup of tea, added the honey Maria liked, and set it before her daughter. Then she sat across from her and tried to find words adequate to explain what had happened. In the end, she simply told the story chronologically, from the lawyers in the conference room, through her suggestion and its reception, through the summons to meet Alexander Blackwood, through the impossible offer. Maria listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. Her expression progressed through surprise, disbelief, excitement, and finally settled into something more complex, a mixture of pride and concern that Rosa recognized because she felt it herself. "So let me make sure I understand," Maria said when Rosa finished. "The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company wants to give you a job that pays 3 times what you make now in operations analysis because you solved a problem 9 lawyers couldn't?" "That's what he said," Rosa confirmed. "And you're not sure if you should take it?" "I don't know anything about operations analysis. I don't have the education." "Mom, stop," Maria interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been saying that your whole life. I don't have the education, but you're one of the smartest people I know. You just proved that today." Rosa shook her head. "I got lucky. I had a simple idea that happened to work." "Lucky?" Maria's voice rose slightly. "Mom, do you hear yourself? 9 people with law degrees couldn't solve this problem. You walked in and solved it in 2 minutes. That's not luck. That's intelligence." "It's different kinds of intelligence," Rosa protested. "I'm not stupid, I know that. But I'm practical. I solve everyday problems. What they're offering, it's different. It's corporate strategy, analysis, things you've never done in an office, maybe," Maria said, leaning forward. "But you've been solving problems your whole life. You figure out how to stretch a paycheck to cover expenses. You diagnosed what was wrong with Mrs. Chen's washing machine just by listening to it. You reorganized that entire supply closet at your last job and cut the cleaning time for the whole building by 20%. She paused. "You got me into college, Mom. You navigated financial aid, scholarship applications, all of it, with no help, no guide. That's analysis, that's problem solving. It just didn't have a fancy title." Rosa felt her eyes stinging. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" Maria reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "What if you are? What if you're amazing at it? Don't you think you deserve to find out?" They sat there in silence for a moment, hands clasped across the scratched surface of a table Rosa had bought at a yard sale 7 years ago. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, turning the evening into premature night. "I worked so hard so you could have opportunities," Rosa said finally. "I never thought about having them myself. I'm 43, Mija. Maybe I'm too old to start something new." "You're 43, not 83, Maria countered, "and you're healthy and sharp and clearly capable of impressing the CEO of a major company. Mum, listen to me. My whole life you've told me I could do anything if I worked hard enough, if I believed in myself. Don't you think the same applies to you?" Rosa laughed, a slightly watery sound. "When did you become the parent in this relationship?" "About 5 minutes ago, apparently." Maria squeezed her hands. take the job, Mom. At least try it. If it doesn't work out, you can always find another cleaning position. But if you don't try, you'll never know. And that would be the real failure. They talked for another hour, Maria gradually working through her mother's fears and objections with a combination of logic and gentle mockery that Rosa found both exasperating and effective. By the time they moved on to preparing dinner together, pasta with a sauce Rosa could make in her sleep, cheap and filling and comforting, Rosa had moved from terrified rejection to tentative consideration. That night, after Maria had gone to bed, and Rosa lay on her pull-out couch staring at the ceiling, she allowed herself to imagine it. Waking up and putting on real business clothes instead of a cleaning uniform, working at a desk instead of pushing a cart, being addressed as a colleague instead of being functionally invisible, having her ideas sought out, valued, implemented. It seemed like a fantasy, something from a movie rather than real life. But it had happened. Alexander Blackwood had looked her in the eye and offered it to her. The question was whether she had the courage to accept. Sleep came late and fitfully, punctuated by dreams that mixed anxiety and hope in equal measure. When her alarm sounded at 5:30, she had forgotten to turn it off, though she wasn't scheduled to work today. Rosa woke with a clarity she hadn't possessed the night before. She would call Jennifer Huang. She would say yes. And if it all fell apart, if she failed spectacularly, at least she would have tried. The decision made, Rosa felt an unfamiliar lightness. She made coffee, sat at her kitchen table with her phone, and waited for a reasonable hour to call. At 9 o'clock exactly, she dialed the number Jennifer Huang had given her. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. Jennifer Huang's office. This is Melissa speaking. Rosa's carefully planned opening words evaporated. I'm trying to reach Ms. Huang. My name is Rosa Martinez. Oh, Ms. Martinez. The assistant's voice warmed immediately. Ms. Huang said you might call. Please hold for just one moment. The hold music was mercifully brief. Then Jennifer Huang's voice came on the line, friendly and businesslike. Rosa, good morning. I was hoping I'd hear from you. Good morning, Ms. Huang. I've thought about Mr. Blackwood's offer. If it's still available, I would like to accept. She heard what sounded like a smile in Jennifer's voice. It's absolutely still available, and I'm delighted to hear you say yes. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? We'll go over the details, get paperwork started, discuss training schedule. Yes, I can do that. Excellent. Do you know where my office is? Rosa had to admit she didn't. Jennifer provided directions, 49th floor, northwest corner, and they confirmed the appointment. After the call ended, Rosa sat for a moment, phone still in her hand, absorbing the reality that she had just changed her life. The rest of the morning passed in a strange suspension. Rosa cleaned the apartment with unusual vigor, channeling her nervous energy into scrubbing and organizing. She went through her closet, such as it was, trying to assemble something appropriate for a business meeting that wasn't her cleaning uniform. She settled on dark pants and a simple blouse, her one pair of shoes that weren't for work or walking. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who seemed poised on the edge of something vast and unknowable. At 1:30, she left the apartment and took the bus downtown. She arrived at Meridian Holdings with 20 minutes to spare and spent them in the building's lobby, a vast space of marble and steel that she had passed through countless times but never truly observed. There were art installations, comfortable seating areas, a coffee shop she had never patronized because it seemed too expensive, too much a place for people who belonged there in a way she did not. But she would belong there now, wouldn't she? Or she would try to. At precisely 2 o'clock, Rosa took the elevator to the 49th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that was somehow more refined than the 47th floor she knew, all subtle luxury and understated elegance. She gave her name to the receptionist, another young woman who greeted her with professional warmth, and was told to wait just a moment. Jennifer Huang appeared within minutes, dressed in a grey suit that managed to look both authoritative and approachable. She was perhaps 40, Chinese-American, with an efficiency of movement that suggested someone who managed her time carefully. She extended her hand, smiling. "Rosa, thank you for coming. Please, follow me." Her office was modest by executive standards. A corner space with windows overlooking the city, a desk with 2 monitors, filing cabinets, and a small conference table where Jennifer gestured for Rosa to sit. There was a folder already prepared, thick with documents. "I won't bury you in paperwork just yet," Jennifer began, settling into her own chair with a cup of coffee she'd brought with her. "But I want to explain exactly what we're offering, what we expect, and what you can expect from us." She opened the folder. "First, the position. We're creating a role for you in our operations analysis department. It reports to Daniel Park, who you met yesterday. The team examines how we do things throughout the company, everything from how we process expense reports to how we schedule meetings to how we analyze market data. They look for inefficiencies, redundancies, places where we're working harder than we need to be." Rosa nodded, taking this in. "And what would I do exactly?" "Initially, you'd be paired with a senior analyst who would train you. You'd learn our systems, our methodologies, how we gather data and present recommendations. After about 3 months, assuming things are going well, you'd start taking on small projects independently. Nothing overwhelming at first, maybe examining one specific process in one department. As you gain confidence and experience, the projects would grow." "And if I'm not good at it?" Rosa asked quietly. "If I can't learn fast enough?" Jennifer's expression became serious but not unkind. "Let me be very clear about something. Mr. Blackwood doesn't make offers lightly, and neither do I. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't genuinely believe you have the capacity to succeed. But I'll also be honest, there will be a learning curve. You'll be acquiring new vocabulary, new concepts, new ways of thinking about problems. It may be frustrating at times." She paused. "However, we're prepared to invest in your success. You'll have training, mentorship, resources. You'll also have time. We're not expecting you to be an expert in 3 weeks." She slid a sheet of paper toward Rosa. "This is the compensation package. Base salary is $65,000 per year to start, with a review at 6 months and annually thereafter. Health insurance for you and your daughter, dental, vision, retirement plan with company matching, 3 weeks paid vacation, sick leave, professional development budget." Rosa stared at the numbers. $65,000. She made $22,000 in her current job, and that was after years of small raises. This was almost triple, with benefits she had only dreamed of. She could afford to move to a better apartment. She could help Maria more with school expenses. She could actually save money, instead of living paycheck to paycheck with no buffer for emergencies. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say you're excited," Jennifer suggested with a smile. "Say you're ready to start. Say thank you if you want. Though I should tell you that Mr. Blackwood considers this mutually beneficial. You're not charity, Rosa. You're an investment he believes will pay dividends." "When would I start?" 2 weeks. That gives you time to provide notice to your current employer, get your affairs in order, mentally prepare. We'll handle setting up your workspace, computer access, all the logistical pieces. Your first day, you'll come in for orientation. There's a standard program all new employees go through. Then you'll meet your team, your mentor, and begin the actual work. They spent another hour going through details, signing preliminary paperwork, discussing logistics. Jennifer explained the dress code, business casual, meaning Rosa would need to acquire some new clothes, but not an entire executive wardrobe. She explained the working hours, generally 8:30 to 5:30, though the operations team had some flexibility. She explained the culture, collaborative, fairly informal despite the company's size, with an emphasis on results over rigid hierarchy. "One more thing," Jennifer said as their meeting wound down. "Mr. Blackwood would like to see you before you leave. Just briefly. He's in his office now if you have a few minutes." Rosa felt a flutter of renewed anxiety. "Of course." Jennifer walked her down a corridor to another corner office, this one significantly larger than hers. She knocked, received a cold invitation to enter, and ushered Rosa inside before departing with a final, encouraging smile. Alexander Blackwood's office was surprisingly understated given his position. Yes, there was expensive art on the walls, and the view was spectacular, and the furniture was clearly high-end, but it wasn't ostentatious. There were books everywhere, on shelves, stacked on tables, a few even on the floor by his desk. The space felt more like a well-appointed study than a corporate command center. Blackwood himself was on a phone call, but gestured for Rosa to sit. She perched in a leather chair facing his desk and tried not to stare around the room like a tourist. The phone call concluded quickly, something about quarterly projections and board presentations, conducted in the efficient shorthand of people who work together frequently. "Rosa," Blackwood said, setting down his phone and giving her his full attention. "Jennifer tells me you've accepted. I'm glad. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Blackwood." "Alex, please, we're not formal here." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those sharp eyes. "I want to tell you a story, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes." Rosa nodded, curious. "When I was building this company, back when it was just me and 2 other people working out of a rented office that smelled like old carpet, we had a problem. We needed to file some regulatory paperwork, complex stuff, and we couldn't afford to hire the lawyers we needed. I spent 3 weeks trying to figure it out myself, reading regulations until my eyes crossed, making no progress." He smiled at the memory. "Then our office manager, a woman named Dorothy, who we'd hired to answer phones and manage filing, came in one day and asked if she could take a look at what I was working on." Rosa saw where this might be going, but said nothing. Dorothy had a high school education and had spent 20 years as a secretary. But she looked at my regulatory nightmare for about 30 minutes and then explained it to me in plain English. Turned out I'd been overthinking it, making it more complicated than it was. She showed me exactly what I needed to file and how. Saved the company, probably. He paused. "I promoted Dorothy to head of operations within a year. She retired 5 years ago, but she was instrumental in building the systems we still use today." "That's a good story," Rosa said quietly. "It's a true story, and the point is this. I learned early on that intelligence and insight come from unexpected places. That formal education is valuable, but it's not the only kind of value. That sometimes the person who can solve your problem is the person you weren't even thinking to ask." He met her eyes directly. "You're not Dorothy, and this company is very different now than it was then. But the principle remains. You saw something yesterday that 9 Harvard and Yale graduates missed. That wasn't luck. That was a specific kind of intelligence, and it's exactly the kind we need." "I'm afraid I'll disappoint you," Rosa admitted. "You might," Blackwood said with startling frankness. "This might not work out. You might discover you hate the work, or that you're not suited for it, or that you'd rather go back to what you were doing before. That's all possible." He leaned forward. "But I don't think any of those things will happen. Want to know why? Yes, because you're here. Because despite being terrified, and don't bother denying it, I can see it, you said yes. That takes courage, and courage is worth more than credentials most days." He stood, extended his hand again. "Welcome to Meridian Holdings, Rosa. I'm looking forward to seeing what you accomplish." Rosa shook his hand, found her voice. "Thank you. I'll do my best. That's all any of us can do." Jennifer was waiting outside Blackwood's office to escort Rosa back to the elevators. In the elevator going down, Rosa caught sight of her reflection in the polished steel doors, a middle-aged woman in modest clothes, still looking somewhat shell-shocked, but with something new in her expression. Hope, maybe, or determination, or some combination of the two. She exited into the lobby, walked through those doors that had always marked the boundary between her world and theirs, and stepped out into the afternoon. The fog had lifted, revealing a rare moment of San Francisco sunshine. The city gleamed. Rosa pulled out her phone and texted Maria. "I took the job, starting in 2 weeks. Can't believe this is real." The response was almost instantaneous. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. We're celebrating tonight. I'm buying pizza. Don't argue." Rosa smiled, pocketed her phone, and began walking. She had 2 weeks before her new life began. 2 weeks to serve out her notice with spotless solutions, to prepare herself mentally and practically for this transformation. 2 weeks that suddenly seemed both impossibly long and far too short. She thought about Carlos, her supervisor, and how he would react when she gave notice. She thought about her co-workers, the other cleaners she had worked alongside for 3 years. Would they be happy for her? Resentful, disbelieving? She thought about all the small rituals of her work life that would soon be memories. The particular way light fell through windows on the 47th floor in early morning, the sound her cart made on the polished floors, the satisfaction of leaving a space cleaner than she found it. There was grief in this change alongside the excitement. She was leaving behind an identity she had inhabited for 2 decades, a role she had played with competence and even a certain pride. She was becoming someone new, someone she couldn't yet fully envision. But as Rosa walked through the sun-bright afternoon, weaving through crowds of people who had no idea that they were passing someone whose life had just pivoted in an entirely unexpected direction, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but possibility. The sense that her story was not finished, not settled, not determined by circumstances beyond her control. She had spent so long making herself small, fitting herself into the spaces others left for her, accepting limitations as natural and unchangeable. And now, impossibly, someone had looked at her and seen not just a cleaning lady, but a person with a mind worth engaging, with perspectives worth considering, with potential worth investing in. Tomorrow, she would worry about the practical details, giving notice, acquiring appropriate clothes, preparing herself for this new role. Tonight, she would celebrate with Maria, would allow herself to feel joy uncomplicated by anxiety about the future. But right now, in this moment, walking through the city in unexpected sunshine, Rosa simply let herself acknowledge the truth. Her life had changed, and for once, against all odds and expectations, it had changed for the better. The 2 weeks passed in a peculiar duality of time, simultaneously dragging with agonizing slowness and racing by with alarming speed. Rosa gave her notice to Carlos, who received the news with a complex expression that mixed genuine happiness for her with something that might have been envy or regret. He had worked for Spotless Solutions for 20 years and would likely work there 20 more, trapped not by lack of ability, but by circumstances and choices made long ago that had calcified into permanence. Her co-workers' reactions varied more dramatically. Some, like Elena, an older woman from Guatemala who had cleaned offices even longer than Rosa, responded with unalloyed joy and insisted on organizing a small farewell gathering. Others, particularly the younger workers who harbored their own frustrated ambitions, offered congratulations that felt slightly hollow, tinged with the unspoken question of why Rosa had been plucked from obscurity when they remained unseen. Rosa understood both responses and judged neither. She had been lucky, or perhaps she had been in the right place at the right moment with the right instinct, and luck was not something one could distribute equitably, no matter how much one might wish to. The farewell gathering, held in the break room on her last day, was both touching and uncomfortable. Someone had brought a cake from the discount bakery. Elena had collected money from the crew for a card and a small gift, a leather portfolio that Rosa suspected cost more than they could afford, purchased collectively from a desire to mark this moment as significant. Rosa accepted it with tears in her eyes, understanding that these people who had little enough themselves were giving her not just an object, but their blessing, their vicarious hope that someone from their world could transcend its boundaries. "You remember us when you're fancy office lady," Elena said, gripping Rosa's hands with fingers worn rough from decades of cleaning chemicals. "You remember where you came from." "I could never forget," Rosa replied, and meant it absolutely. But even as she cherished these final moments with people who had been her community, Rosa felt herself already inhabiting a liminal space between identities. She was no longer quite one of them, though neither was she yet whatever she would become. It was disorienting, this sense of being suspended between worlds, belonging fully to neither. The practical preparations for her new life consumed much of those 2 weeks. Maria, with the organizational fervor of someone who had inherited her mother's practical intelligence, had created a detailed checklist of everything Rosa would need. Together, they went shopping, an experience that revealed how completely Rosa's wardrobe had been built around either cleaning work or casual home life. She owned almost nothing appropriate for a business environment. Maria, navigating thrift stores and discount outlets with the expertise of someone who had learned to stretch limited resources, helped Rosa assemble a basic professional wardrobe. 3 pairs of dress pants, 5 blouses that could be mixed and matched, a cardigan, a blazer from a consignment shop that needed only minor alterations, 2 pairs of shoes that were comfortable enough for a full day but looked appropriately professional. It was modest by corporate standards, but represented a significant investment for them, one that Rosa could now astonishingly afford, without the usual careful calculation of what other necessity would have to be sacrificed. "You look good," Maria said, standing back to assess Rosa in her new clothes. "You look like you belong in that building." Rosa studied herself in the dressing room mirror of the second-hand shop and tried to see what Maria saw. The woman looking back at her wore the costume of professional respectability, but Rosa wasn't yet certain the performance would be convincing. She still felt like someone playing dress-up, a child in her mother's clothes, pretending to be grown. "I look like I'm pretending," Rosa said quietly. "Everyone's pretending, Mom," Maria replied with the casual wisdom of her generation. "You think all those executives know what they're doing every minute? They're just better at acting like they do. You'll learn." Beyond the clothes, there were other preparations. Rosa had to familiarize herself with technology she had rarely used beyond basic functions. Her phone was old and had served primarily for calls and texts. She would need to become comfortable with email, with calendar applications, with video calls. Maria, with the patience of a good teacher, walked her through these functions repeatedly until Rosa felt at least marginally competent. "The important thing," Maria explained, "is not to be afraid to ask for help. People will expect you to have a learning curve. They know you're coming from a different kind of work. As long as you're trying and improving, you'll be fine." Rosa hoped this was true. The anxiety that had briefly subsided after her decision to accept the position had returned in force as the start date approached. She lay awake nights constructing elaborate scenarios of failure and humiliation. She would misunderstand instructions and make costly mistakes. She would be unable to grasp the concepts her colleagues discussed. She would prove to be exactly what some dismissive part of herself whispered she was. A cleaning lady who had gotten absurdly above herself, whose momentary insight had been fluked, who would be exposed as a fraud within days or weeks. Maria, noticing her mother's increasing tension, tried various tactics to ease it. One evening, 3 days before Rosa was scheduled to start, she sat Rosa down at their small kitchen table with a cup of tea and a serious expression. "Mom, I need you to listen to me," Maria said. "Really listen, not just hear me and then go back to panicking." Rosa managed a weak smile. "I'm listening. You've spent your whole life solving problems. Not abstract theoretical problems, but real ones. How to feed us on $40 a week. How to fix a broken toilet when we couldn't afford a plumber. How to navigate immigration paperwork when you barely spoke English. How to get me into college when no one in our family had ever gone." Maria leaned forward, her expression intense. "Those are hard problems, Mom. Way harder than most of what people in offices deal with. The stakes were higher, the resources were fewer, and you solved them." "That's different." "It's not different," Maria interrupted firmly. "It's the same skill set, just applied to different situations. You observe, you analyze, you find practical solutions. That's what got you noticed. That's what they're paying you for." Stop thinking of yourself as someone who doesn't belong there and start thinking of yourself as someone who brings a different and valuable perspective. Rosa absorbed this, wanting desperately to believe it. What if I fail? Then you fail, Maria said simply, and you'll survive it, and you'll find something else. But what if you don't fail? What if you're actually good at this? Don't you want to find out? It was the same argument Maria had made 2 weeks ago, but repetition had not dulled its effectiveness. Rosa nodded slowly. I want to find out. Good, then stop catastrophizing and go to bed at a reasonable hour for once. The night before her first day, Rosa lay awake until past midnight despite Maria's advice, her mind spinning through every possible scenario. When she finally slept, her dreams were anxious and confused. She was back in El Salvador, but also in an office building. She was cleaning, but also presenting something to stern-faced executives. She was both 14 and 43 simultaneously. She woke unrested, her alarm sounding at 6 o'clock, though she had been awake already for half an hour, simply lying still and trying to calm her racing heart. Maria emerged from the bedroom as Rosa was making coffee, looking sleepy but determined. I'm awake to see you off, she announced. First day is a big deal. You didn't have to. Mom, let me do this. So Rosa allowed herself to be fussed over, to have Maria help her select which of her new blouses to wear, to accept the pep talk her daughter delivered between bites of toast. And when it was time to leave, embarrassingly early, but Rosa couldn't bear the thought of being late, Maria hugged her tightly at the door. You've got this, Maria whispered. Go show them what Rosa Martinez can do. The bus ride downtown felt endless. Rosa clutched the leather portfolio her co-workers had given her, which now contained a notepad, pens, and very little else. She watched the city pass outside the windows, familiar streets taking on new significance now that she was traveling them with a different purpose. She was not going to clean these buildings, but to work in one, to be part of the operations that ran them. Meridian Holdings' lobby seemed different this Monday morning, populated as it was with the week's beginning rush of employees. Rosa joined the stream of people heading for the elevators, acutely conscious of her new clothes, her portfolio, her complete lack of the casual confidence everyone else seemed to possess. In the elevator, pressed among people in suits and carrying expensive bags, she felt like an imposter seconds away from being identified and ejected. But no one looked at her with suspicion or recognition. She was simply another person going to work, indistinguishable from the crowd. It was strange to be visible in this way, present but unremarkable, noticed but not scrutinized. She had spent so long being invisible that this ordinary visibility felt almost radical. The 49th floor's reception area, where she had met with Jennifer Huang, was her destination. The receptionist, a different young woman than before, greeted her with professional warmth when Rosa gave her name. Ms. Martinez, yes, Ms. Huang will be right out. Please, have a seat. Rosa sat in one of the elegant chairs that she had never allowed herself to occupy in all her years cleaning this building. She smoothed her new blouse, adjusted her portfolio, and tried to breathe steadily. Around her, the machinery of business hummed along, phones ringing, people passing through, the muted sounds of a workplace beginning its day. Jennifer Huang appeared within minutes, smiling and extending her hand. Rosa, welcome. Your first day. How are you feeling? Nervous, Rosa admitted. That's completely normal. Come on, let's get you set up. Jennifer led her through a maze of corridors, explaining the floor's layout as they walked. We're a bit scattered up here. Operations analysis is actually down one floor, on 48, but you'll be spending your first day or two with HR getting oriented before you meet your team. They arrived at a small conference room where several other people were already seated. All new employees, Rosa realized, starting their own first days. There was a young man, barely out of college by his appearance, fidgeting with nervous energy. A woman perhaps a decade younger than Rosa, professionally dressed and carrying an air of competent self-possession. An older gentleman with grey hair who looked utterly calm and vaguely amused by the situation. Welcome, everyone. Jennifer said, moving to the front of the room. "Thank you all for choosing Meridian Holdings. We're going to spend the morning going through orientation, company policies, benefits overview, system setup, all the necessary but somewhat tedious logistics of getting you integrated into our operations." The morning proceeded exactly as Jennifer had described. Tedious but necessary. They reviewed employee handbooks, filled out forms, received their ID badges and system logins, learned about everything from vacation request procedures to emergency evacuation protocols. It was overwhelming in its detail, but not in its difficulty. Rosa followed along, taking careful notes, asking occasional clarification questions, and gradually realizing that she was keeping pace with everyone else without unusual struggle. At lunch, provided in the building's executive cafeteria, a space Rosa had cleaned many times but never eaten in, she found herself seated with the young man from orientation, whose name was Marcus and who had just completed his MBA. "What department are you joining?" he asked, making conversation with the tentative friendliness of someone equally nervous. "Operations analysis," Rosa replied. "And you?" "Finance, analyst track. This is my first corporate job. I'm terrified I'm going to mess something up immediately." He laughed self-consciously. "Did 4 years of undergrad and 2 years of business school, and I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing." Rosa smiled, finding comfort in his admission. "I think maybe everyone feels that way at first." "Yeah? What's your background?" This was the question Rosa had been dreading, knowing it would come repeatedly and never quite knowing how to answer it. She could dissemble, could be vague, could find ways to dodge the truth, but she had decided during her sleepless night that she would not begin this new chapter by being ashamed of the previous ones. "I've been a cleaning lady for the past 21 years, she said simply. "But I helped solve a problem for some lawyers here, and the CEO decided to give me a chance in a different role." Marcus's eyes widened. "Wait, seriously? That's incredible. That's the kind of story people tell about this company being different, but I didn't think it actually happened." "Apparently it does," Rosa said, warming to his genuine enthusiasm rather than any hint of condescension or doubt. "That's honestly so cool," Marcus continued. "I mean, I've got all this education and I'm still not sure I can add real value, but you already did. You've already proven yourself useful before even officially starting. That's amazing." Rosa felt something loosen in her chest. Perhaps she had been preparing for judgment that wouldn't necessarily materialize. Perhaps people would see her story not as evidence of her inadequacy, but as evidence of her capability. The afternoon brought more orientation activities, including technology training that Rosa found challenging but manageable with the foundation Maria had helped her build. By the time Jennifer Huang collected her at 4 o'clock, "We try not to overwhelm on the first day, so you're done early," Rosa was exhausted but also oddly exhilarated. "How was it?" Jennifer asked as they walked back toward the elevators. "A lot of information," Rosa said honestly, "but good. Better than I feared. Tomorrow you'll meet your team and start the actual work. Daniel Park, your department head, is looking forward to meeting you properly. And your mentor, his name is Kevin Chen, very experienced, very patient, will be walking you through your first projects." Jennifer paused at the elevator bank. "Rosa, I want you to know that everyone in the department has been briefed on your situation. They understand you're coming from a non-traditional background. There's no expectation that you'll know things you haven't been taught yet. The expectation is simply that you'll learn and contribute your perspective. That's all." "Thank you," Rosa said quietly. "That helps." She rode the elevator down with a group of other departing employees, anonymous among them, and walked out into the late afternoon. The fog was rolling in again, that familiar San Francisco phenomenon, but today it felt less ominous and more like a gentle embrace. Rosa texted Maria, "Survived day 1, actually not terrible. Tell you all about it at home." The response came quickly, "I knew it! So proud! Pizza again tonight? We might need to make this our Monday tradition." Rosa smiled and pocketed her phone. As she walked to the bus stop, she passed the entrance to the building's service corridors, where she had spent countless mornings arriving for her cleaning shifts. A few workers in spotless solutions uniforms were visible through the glass, preparing their evening rounds. Rosa recognized one of them, Jorge, who had started about 6 months before she left, and for a moment, their eyes met. Jorge's expression flickered with surprise and confusion. He had obviously heard about her departure, but was now seeing her here, at this hour, dressed like this. Rosa offered a small wave, unsure what else to do, and Jorge waved back uncertainly before being called away by a supervisor. It was a strange moment, emblematic of the larger strangeness of her situation. She existed now between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, understood completely by few. The people in her new workplace couldn't quite comprehend where she had come from. The people from her old world couldn't quite comprehend where she now was. She would have to navigate this liminal space, forge an identity that incorporated both her past and her present, refuse to let either be erased by the other. The bus arrived and Rosa climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. As the city scrolled past, she thought about tomorrow, when she would meet her actual team and begin the real work. The anxiety was still there, coiled in her stomach, but it was joined now by something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or determination. Or simply the acceptance that she had committed to this path and would walk it as far as it led, wherever that might be. When she arrived home, Maria was already there, having cut her evening class. Special circumstances, she explained without apology. True to her word, she had ordered pizza, and they ate it at their small kitchen table while Rosa recounted her day in detail. Maria listened with focused attention, asking questions, offering encouragement, and generally serving as the kind of supportive presence Rosa had spent 2 decades providing for her daughter. It felt strange to have their roles partially reversed, but also right, a recognition that Maria was no longer a child to be protected, but an adult partner in navigating life's complexities. "So tomorrow you start for real," Maria said, finishing her last slice. "How do you feel?" "Scared," Rosa admitted, "but maybe a little excited too. That's good, that's healthy. Fear without excitement is paralysis. Excitement without fear is recklessness. You've got the right balance." Maria stood, began clearing their plates. "Mom, can I say something kind of serious?" "Of course. I know you're doing this partly for me, so I can focus on school without worrying so much about money, so you can help me more. And I love you for that, and I'm grateful." She paused, her back to Rosa as she rinsed dishes. "But I want you to know that it's okay to do this for yourself too. It's okay to want something for Rosa, not just for Rosa the mother. You're allowed to have ambitions and goals that are yours, not just extensions of taking care of me." Rosa felt her throat tighten. "You've always been my goal, my purpose." "I know, and that's beautiful, and it's given me everything I have." Maria turned to face her. "But you're more than just my mother. You're a whole person with your own potential. And watching you step into that, watching you take this chance, it makes me so proud. Not because of what it does for me, but because of what it does for you." They embraced there in their small kitchen, 2 women who had survived and persevered and made a life together against considerable odds, now standing at the threshold of something new and unknown. That night, Rosa slept better than she had in weeks. And when her alarm sounded the next morning, she rose with purpose, dressed in her careful new clothes, and prepared to face whatever her second day would bring. The 48th floor, where the Operations Analysis Department resided, was slightly less polished than the executive floor above, but still maintained the building's general atmosphere of professional competence. Jennifer Huang met Rosa at the elevator again. "Just for today, then you'll be on your own navigating," and led her to a corner of the floor where several desks were arranged in a loose cluster. "This is the Operations Analysis team," Jennifer explained. "That's your desk there by the window." Rosa's desk. She had never had a desk before, not one that was hers, with a computer and a phone and a nameplate that would eventually bear her name. She approached it tentatively, as if it might vanish if she got too close. "Rosa, good morning." A man approached, hand extended. Chinese-American, perhaps 40, with an easy smile and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. "Kevin Chen, I'll be your mentor for the next few months. Welcome to the team." "Thank you," Rosa managed, shaking his hand. "Let me introduce you to everyone." Kevin guided her around the cluster of desks, rattling off names and roles. There was Priya, who specialized in supply chain analysis. Marcus, not the same Marcus from yesterday, but an older Marcus who focused on human resources processes. Sarah, who examined client onboarding procedures. David, who was relatively new himself and handled various smaller projects. All of them greeted her with varying degrees of friendliness, professional courtesy, masking what Rosa assumed was curiosity about the cleaning lady who had impressed the CEO. "All right, everyone back to work," Kevin announced with good-natured authority. "Rosa, let's get you set up." He spent the next hour walking her through the basics: how to log into various systems, where files were stored, how to access the databases they used for gathering information, the template they used for presenting findings. It was overwhelming, but also oddly familiar in structure. It was not so different, Rosa thought, from learning a new building's layout and systems when she took on a new cleaning contract. Different content, same underlying logic of understanding how pieces fit together. "Now let me explain what we do here in very simple terms," Kevin said, settling into a chair beside her desk. "Basically, companies are complicated. As they grow, they accumulate processes, ways of doing things, that made sense at one point but maybe don't anymore. Or different departments develop different ways of doing similar things, which creates inefficiency, or people just never think to question whether there's a better way. That's where we come in." "You find the better ways," Rosa said. "Exactly. We observe, we gather data, we analyze, we make recommendations. Sometimes they're big changes, sometimes they're tiny tweaks. But the goal is always to make the company run more smoothly, more efficiently, more effectively." He pulled up a document on her computer. "This is a recent project I did examining how we process vendor payments. I'm going to walk you through it step by step, showing you how I approached it, what I looked at, how I drew conclusions. This will give you a sense of the methodology." For the next 2 hours, Kevin walked Rosa through the project in exhaustive detail. He showed her how he had started by simply observing the current process, talking to the people who executed it, how he had gathered data on how long each step took, where bottlenecks occurred, where errors happened most frequently, how he had researched best practices from other companies, how he had developed his recommendations, including both immediate quick fixes and longer-term structural changes, how he had presented his findings to the relevant stakeholders, anticipating their questions and objections. Rosa followed along, taking copious notes, asking questions when things weren't clear. And gradually, despite her anxiety, she began to see the shape of it, how this work was indeed about pattern recognition and practical problem-solving, dressed up in business language and formal processes, but fundamentally similar to many things she had done before. "Questions so far?" Kevin asked after finishing his walkthrough. "It's a lot," Rosa admitted, "but I think I understand the basic approach. You look at what is, imagine what could be, and then figure out how to get from one to the other." Kevin grinned. "That's actually a perfect summary. That's exactly what we do. Now let me show you what you'll be working on first. We're going to start you with something small and manageable, a perfect learning project." He explained that the company's main conference rooms had a booking system that was apparently causing confusion and frustration. Double bookings occurred regularly. Some rooms sat empty while others were constantly overbooked. There was no clear policy on cancellations or on priority when conflicts arose. It was a minor issue in the grand scheme of the company's operations, but it created daily aggravation for many employees. "Your job," Kevin said, "is to figure out what's wrong with the current system and recommend improvements. I'll help you, obviously, but you'll take the lead. You'll talk to the people who book the rooms, the people who use them, the admins who manage the calendar. You'll look at the booking data, you'll research what best practices exist, and then you'll put together a recommendation. Rosa felt panic rising. This seemed impossibly complex, far beyond her capability. I don't know how to do any of that. Not yet, Kevin agreed calmly. But you will. We're going to start today by simply observing. I want you to spend the afternoon just watching how the conference room booking system works. Maybe try booking a room yourself and see what the process is like. Walk past the conference rooms and see which ones are in use, which are empty. Chat with the receptionist who handles a lot of the bookings if she has time. Just gather impressions, no pressure to solve anything yet. Just observe. This Rosa could do. Observation was something she had practiced for 2 decades, moving through spaces and noting how they functioned, where the patterns were, where the problems lived. Okay, she said, I can do that. Great. And Rosa, Kevin met her eyes seriously. Don't try to be perfect. Don't try to already know things you haven't been taught. Just be curious, be observant, and be honest about what you see. That's genuinely all we're asking right now. So Rosa spent her afternoon doing exactly what Kevin had suggested, observing. She navigated to the conference room booking system and created a test reservation, noting where the interface was confusing, where options were unclear. She walked the various floors, ostensibly familiarizing herself with the building from this new perspective, but actually noting which conference rooms were occupied and which sat empty. She chatted briefly with Melissa, the receptionist on the executive floor, who expressed exasperated relief that someone was finally looking at the booking nightmare. I spend half my time mediating disputes about rooms, Melissa confided. Just last week I had 2 VPs almost get into a shouting match because they both thought they had room C reserved for the same time. It's ridiculous. Rosa took notes. Not formal analytical notes, just observations and impressions in her own language. By the end of the afternoon, she had pages of them, and while she wasn't sure yet what they meant or how to organize them into useful recommendations, she had a sense of the problem's shape and texture. Kevin reviewed her notes before she left for the day. This is excellent, he said, and seemed to mean it. You're seeing things, noticing patterns. Tomorrow we'll start organizing these observations into a more structured analysis. But for today, this is great work. Rosa left that evening feeling cautiously hopeful. She hadn't solved anything yet, hadn't proven herself capable of this new role. But neither had she failed spectacularly or revealed herself as hopelessly out of her depth. She had simply observed, questioned, and documented. It was a beginning. The days that followed established a rhythm. Each morning, Rosa arrived at her desk, logged into systems that became incrementally more familiar, and worked with Kevin on her conference room project. They organized her observations into categories. They gathered quantitative data on booking patterns. They researched how other companies handled similar systems. They identified the core problems: unclear priorities, a cumbersome interface, no consequences for no-shows or late cancellations. Slowly, with Kevin's guidance, Rosa began to formulate recommendations. They should simplify the booking interface, making it more intuitive. They should establish clear priority rules. Executive meetings took precedence over departmental meetings, which took precedence over small team discussions. They should implement a system where repeated no-shows resulted in temporary loss of booking privileges. They should add a feature allowing people to see alternate available times when their first choice was booked. 3 weeks into her tenure, Kevin deemed her ready to present her recommendations to Daniel Park, their department head. Rosa prepared for this presentation with the kind of anxious intensity she usually reserved for major life events. She rehearsed her points, anticipated questions, refined her slides with Kevin's help until they were clear and professional. The presentation itself lasted 20 minutes. Rosa, hands slightly trembling, walked Daniel through her analysis, her findings, and her recommendations. She spoke in careful English, occasionally stumbling over business terminology, but pushing through. She answered his questions, some of which she handled confidently, and some of which required her to admit uncertainty, but promise follow-up research. When she finished, Daniel sat back in his chair considering. "This is solid work, Rosa. Really solid. Your recommendations are practical, implementable, and you've clearly thought through the implications." He glanced at Kevin. "How long did this take, start to finish?" 3 weeks, but remember she was learning our methods and systems simultaneously," Kevin replied. "Still impressive." Daniel turned back to Rosa. "Here's what we're going to do. I want you to refine these recommendations based on our discussion today. Then we'll present them to operations management next week. If they approve, and I think they will, you'll help oversee the implementation. This will be your first completed project." Rosa managed to thank him, without her voice shaking too noticeably. As she and Kevin left Daniel's office, Kevin allowed himself a satisfied smile. "See? You did it. Not only did you do it, you did it well. I couldn't have without your help," Rosa said honestly. "Of course not. You're learning, that's the point. But the core insights, the practical recommendations, those came from you. I just helped you structure and present them." The conference room booking system recommendations were indeed approved, and Rosa found herself working with the IT department and operations team to implement them. It was strange to be on the other side of these changes, to be one of the people deciding how things should work, rather than simply adapting to decisions others had made. Strange, but also increasingly natural. Word of her success spread quietly through the department, and apparently beyond it. 2 months into her role, Alexander Blackwood stopped by the operations analysis floor, a rare event that caused subtle ripples of heightened attention. He made his way to Rosa's desk, where she was working on her second project, an analysis of the building's visitor sign-in procedures. "Ms. Martinez," he said, and his use of her last name in this setting felt like a gesture of respect rather than formality. "I hear your conference room project was a success." Rosa stood, flustered. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Kevin Chen helped me a great deal." "I'm sure he did, but it was your work, your insights." He glanced at her computer screen, where she had a flowchart of the current visitor process displayed. "What are you tackling now?" "Visitor procedures. Right now it takes an average of 8 minutes for someone to sign in, get their visitor badge, and be escorted to where they need to go. There are bottlenecks, confusion about procedures, security concerns that aren't being adequately addressed." She heard herself speaking with growing confidence. "I think we can cut the time in half while actually improving security." Blackwood smiled slightly. "I look forward to reading your recommendations. Keep up the excellent work." He moved on to speak with Daniel Park, leaving Rosa slightly dizzy from the interaction. "Did the CEO just personally compliment your work?" Priya whispered from the next desk over, her eyes wide. "I think so," Rosa replied, bemused. "That pretty much never happens. He trusts Daniel to handle our department. If he came down here specifically to talk to you, that's significant." Priya grinned. "You're making the rest of us look bad, Martinez." But her tone was friendly, and Rosa sensed no real resentment. She had been cautiously accepted by her team, who seemed to appreciate that she worked hard, asked for help when needed, and brought genuine insights to their projects. The fact that she had started as a cleaning lady had transitioned from potentially suspicious novelty to simply an interesting aspect of her background. Not everything was smooth. There were moments of frustration when Rosa couldn't grasp a concept as quickly as her colleagues, times when her lack of formal education showed itself in gaps of knowledge others took for granted. There were meetings where the discussion moved too fast, using acronyms and references she didn't understand, leaving her feeling lost and inadequate. There were technical skills her co-workers possessed that she had to work twice as hard to acquire. But there were also moments of triumph, times when her practical perspective cut through theoretical debates her more educated colleagues were having. Instances where her experience of how the building actually functioned at ground level provided insights that made her recommendations more implementable. occasions when her ability to talk comfortably with people at all levels of the organization gave her access to information others might have missed. 6 months into her new role, Rosa had her formal review with Daniel Park. She approached it with the same anxiety that had characterized her early days, certain that this would be when they realized their mistake, when the experiment of hiring her would be deemed a failure. "Rosa, sit down," Daniel said, gesturing to a chair in his office. "I want to start by saying that this has been one of the most successful new hire situations I've experienced in my 15 years managing this department." Rosa stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Successful?" "Extremely. You've completed 4 projects in 6 months. That's one more than we typically expect from new analysts. Your recommendations have been implemented with excellent results. Your colleagues enjoy working with you. Your learning curve has been steep, but you've consistently risen to challenges." He slid a paper across his desk. "So, we're promoting you." "Promoting?" "To Operations Analyst 2. It comes with a salary increase 10,000 and more independence in selecting and managing projects. You'll still have mentorship available when you need it, but you've demonstrated you can handle substantial responsibility." Rosa picked up the paper, staring at the numbers that represented yet another transformation of her financial circumstances. She thought about her apartment, which she and Maria had been able to move out of 2 months ago, relocating to a larger 2-bedroom place in a better neighborhood. She thought about the emergency savings account she had opened, which actually contained savings instead of being perpetually empty. She thought about the health insurance that had allowed her to finally get her chronic back pain properly treated. And now, impossibly, there was more. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say thank you and keep doing what you're doing," Daniel replied with a smile. "Rosa, you've proven that talent exists in unexpected places, that potential isn't confined to traditional credentials. You're a credit to this department and to this company." That evening, Rosa and Maria celebrated again. Their celebratory dinners had become more frequent over the past 6 months, marking milestones that once seemed impossible. They went to a restaurant they had previously considered too expensive, and Rosa ordered without anxiety about the prices. "I'm so proud of you, Mum," Maria said, raising her water glass in a toast. "Look at you, Operations Analyst 2. That sounds so official." "It still feels surreal sometimes," Rosa admitted. "Like I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's not a dream. It's what you earned." Maria set down her glass. "Mum, can I tell you something? This whole thing, watching you do this, it's changed how I see my own possibilities. I always thought I'd graduate, get a decent job, work my way up slowly over decades, but you've shown me that sometimes life can shift dramatically if you're ready for it and brave enough to take the chance. That's a gift you've given me." Rosa felt tears threatening and fought them back. "You've always been braver than me. I learned it from you. You just didn't realize you were teaching it." Well, they talked into the evening, mother and daughter, their roles having evolved into something more equal, more mutually supportive. The years of struggle hadn't disappeared. They had shaped both of them indelibly, but they were no longer the only defining feature of their lives. 1 year after Rosa had solved the lawyer's problem, she was asked to